Hey everyone, Steven here with Lucky Casts, and today we're going to take a look at how to add the Decorator design pattern to your Lucky apps using the Decorator shard. The Decorator pattern is useful in a lot of different scenarios, and one that you might commonly see is for something like a user's full name where you're combining the first and last name, or a display name where you're falling back to the email address. I've always found those examples a little bit subjective, and there are a lot of caveats of, oh, well, you could put this in the model, you could put it in a decorator or a helper, but something that I've found really intuitive and a great use case for these decorator classes is around time objects. So I've actually got a Lucky Jumpstart application here. The only thing I've added is a first and last name, which we'll take a look at in a future episode. But for now, let's focus on these timestamps. Right now, I'm just printing out the timestamp itself with the default two-string implementation, which isn't super human readable. It's okay, but not great. To get around this, what you'll often do in your development is add a .toS method with some arguments. So you can pass in some date formatting special reserved characters here, like a 4-digit year, and then a month, and then the day, like this. Let me start the Lucky app here. We'll let it compile. And while we're looking at that, we can see that there are just a ton of different formatting options for these date strings. And as a developer, I might pick one over the other depending on how I'm feeling that day, whether I remember using one previously. And what you can end up with is a lot of different formats. So maybe on another screen, another developer comes along behind me and decides they want to use the shorthand %D instead of this long date string. When this compiles, what we'll see is two different date formats, which for a user can be really jarring. Here I have the year, the month, and the day, and here I have the day, the month, and the year. It may not have been intentional. I may have been the same developer who wrote both of these pieces of code, but if they're in separate places in the app, it can be really difficult to keep things consistent. In this case, what we really want is that decorator pattern, something where instead of putting these strings and bike shedding between us on PRs and issues about the best format, we want to have something like pretty date. And whenever our developers are writing out dates, we know that they need to print out the pretty date. Obviously, this doesn't exist right now, but that's the goal. Let's get it working with the decorator shard. So let's head over to GitHub. This is actually a shard that I wrote. It's just called Decorator. So we can add this to our shard.yaml. We'll throw it down here last in our production dependencies. We'll save. We'll close our dev server and do a quick shards install. And while that's running, let's head over here and tackle the next step, which is to require it. So we'll require Decorator. And that's it. We're ready to run. What I like to do is namespace these or include them in a folder called decorators. So let's name this our time decorator. And the declaration is pretty simple. In fact, it's the example I use in the documentation here. So we're going to have our class time decorator, and we'll inherit from the decorator base class that comes with the shard. The only thing we really need for this to function is a single call to the decorates macro. And in this case, I'm telling the shard that I want to pass it an object, and I want the shard to call that object time, and I want it to ensure that that argument is of type time. Now that we've got that set up, let's make our decorator method. So we'll call this the same thing that we already talked about, pretty date. Let's grab our time object, call the same toS function on it, and use the same date that I defined earlier. So we'll do the year, the month, and the day. We'll save this, close our file explorer, start up our Lucky app again, and let's head back to the show page and use it. And this really is the easy part. So we're just going to call our time decorator class that we just made, pass it in our time, and we'll call the new pretty date method that we just wrote. No more two S's with different formats, no more ambiguity in what we're getting here. We can even make this a more descriptive name for the function like pretty date, no time, or something like that to make it even more clear. But we'll leave it like this for now. We'll save that, let our app recompile, and we are going to see one more error. So the last step is we don't have our time decorator class actually included in our app, right? We're not including that in our require statements. So let's go to our app.cr, and this is in source app.cr, and we just need to add another wildcard to include all of our decorators. Let's do that right after our models. We'll include our decorators. We'll save that. Scroll down, and now we should get a successful compile. And with any luck, when we reload after that compile, we'll see our brand new date formatting with both exactly the same, just like this. Now there is one last really cool feature of this shard that I want to show, which is the ability to delegate any missing methods back to the object that you passed to the decorator. So if we change this show page around a little bit, it'll be a little easier to see. If we call this creation date and we set that equal to our current user created at timestamp, and then we call our decorated date, let's just grab this and remove the pretty date, and then we'll call it date string equals our decorated date dot pretty date. There. Now we got a bunch of objects here. Let's print this out just as it was before. It's our date string. It'll be identical because it's just calling pretty date on our decorated object. But note that I can also take our created at hours, and I could call decorated date, which is again a time decorator object, dot hours. Now remember, as this compiles, we do not have hours defined here. So when that method is missing, it's going to delegate it back to time. And in fact, I even get helpful messages from the compiler here. I've added a plural, hours, instead of hour for this method. So let me fix that. We'll go back to hour, and now this will compile correctly, and I can use this just like I would use any other time object. It's just decorated with the additional functionality that I have. And now we can see on our UI over here, we've got created at hours, 22, and our created at date, which is exactly the same. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and found some really concrete and easy to use examples where a decorator could benefit your application code for clarity, maintainability, and long-term success. This is actually one of the first shards that I've written and put out into the Crystal community, so I'd really appreciate your input, issues, and ultimately contributions on the GitHub repository. Again, that's at stephendolan/decorator on GitHub. Thanks again, and until next time, this has been Stephen with Lucky Casts. Have a great day.